The text came at 11:47 p.m. 3 words that shattered every rule he'd ever lived by. I need you now. Marcus Stone didn't answer personal calls ever. He was a mafia boss, powerful, untouchable, alone by design. But when his housekeeper's message lit up his phone, something inside him broke. 10 minutes later, he was pounding on her door. She opened it drunk, trembling, and raw with a confession that would destroy them both. Because here's what they didn't know yet. Vulnerability was about to become the most dangerous weapon either of them had ever wielded. This is what happened next. Have you ever sent a message you knew could change everything? A text so raw, so desperate, that hitting send felt like jumping off a cliff? Before we dive deeper into this story, if you're connecting with what you're hearing, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. We're building a community here, a place where real stories matter, and your support helps us reach more people who need these messages. Now let me ask you something. What would you do if the one person you'd been hiding your feelings from for months suddenly showed up at your door in the middle of the night? Would you let them in? Or would fear keep that door closed? Stay with me, because what unfolds next will make you question everything you thought you knew about power, vulnerability, and the courage it takes to need someone. The phone vibrated against the mahogany desk at 11:47 p.m. Marcus Stone didn't move. He sat in the leather chair of his downtown penthouse office, a glass of bourbon untouched beside him, his eyes fixed on the city lights bleeding through floor-to-ceiling windows. The glow of the skyline painted his face in shadows and amber, but his expression remained stone-cold, unreadable. This was his kingdom. From this height, he controlled empires, moved money like chess pieces, and made decisions that could ruin lives or save them. But tonight, in this moment, he felt nothing but emptiness. The phone vibrated again, persistent, demanding attention. He'd learned long ago not to answer calls after hours unless they came from 5 specific numbers. His underboss, Vincent, who handled the street-level operations. His lawyer, Davidson, who kept him out of courtrooms and jail cells. His mother, Elena, who still prayed for his soul every Sunday. His sister, Sophia, who'd cut ties with him years ago but occasionally checked in out of obligation. And finally, Raphael, the man who cleaned up problems that couldn't be solved with money or negotiations. The kind of problems that disappeared in the middle of the night and were never spoken of again. This wasn't one of those numbers. The screen glowed in the darkness, cutting through the shadows like a beacon. The name displayed made his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with business or danger. Bella Martinez. His jaw tightened involuntarily. He should ignore it. She was his housekeeper, for God's sake, had been for 8 months now, and in all that time, she'd never once contacted him outside of work. Never called, never texted, never asked for anything beyond the scope of her job. Never overstepped the invisible boundary that separated employer from employee, power from submission, his world from hers. She showed up at 7 every Monday and Thursday morning, moved through his penthouse like a ghost, left everything pristine and smelling of jasmine, and disappeared by noon. He barely knew her voice beyond the soft, "Good morning, Mr. Stone," she offered when their paths crossed. She was a shadow in his life, present but not intrusive, there but not demanding, seen but carefully not acknowledged. The phone buzzed a third time. A text message. He told himself he wouldn't look, told himself it was probably nothing important. A scheduling conflict, a question about cleaning supplies, maybe a notification that she couldn't make it this week. Told himself that the tight coil of something unfamiliar in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to concern, was just annoyance at being interrupted during his late-night contemplation. He was lying to himself, and some part of him knew it. He looked anyway. I need you now. 3 words. No punctuation, no explanation, no context. Just 3 simple words that somehow carried the weight of a confession, a plea, and a breaking point all at once. Marcus stared at the screen until it went dark, the words burning into his retinas like an afterimage. Then he lit it up again with a tap of his thumb, as if seeing it a second time might change what it said or reveal some hidden meaning he'd missed. The timestamp read 11:49 p.m. He read the message twice more, then a third time, searching for context that wasn't there, for a tone he couldn't decipher through pixels and glass. Was she in danger? Was she hurt? Was this a mistake? A message meant for someone else? I need you now. No one needed him. Not really. People feared him, yes. They respected him, or at least respected what he could do to them if they crossed him. They owed him favors, money, loyalty purchased with threats or opportunities. They used him when it suited their purposes, when they needed muscle or connections or problem solved. But needed? That was a word reserved for weakness, for people who didn't understand that dependence was a chain you couldn't break once it was forged. It was a vulnerability he'd spent his entire adult life avoiding, both in himself and in others. He'd built his entire empire on a simple principle: make sure no one could need him, and make damn sure he needed no one. Needs created leverage, and leverage created risk. In his world, risk meant death, or worse, betrayal, loss, the kind of pain that destroyed you from the inside out. And yet, his hand moved before his mind could catch up and override the impulse. He stood abruptly, the leather chair scraping against Italian marble with a sound that echoed in the vast empty office. His fingers were already reaching for his coat, draped over the back of a second chair. His keys, sitting in a crystal dish on the corner of his desk. His gun, a sleek Glock 9mm that he kept in the top drawer, loaded and ready. Muscle memory from 1,000 exits, 1,000 emergencies, 1,000 times he'd had to move fast and think later. But this wasn't business. This wasn't one of his men in trouble, caught by rivals or cops. This wasn't a deal gone sideways, requiring his immediate presence to smooth things over or make an example of someone. This wasn't the kind of crisis his life usually generated. This was Bella. He didn't know why that mattered. Didn't want to examine too closely the way her name had lodged itself somewhere behind his ribs over the past 8 months, taking up residence in a space he didn't even know existed. The way he'd started noticing things about her, small details that had no business occupying his thoughts. How she hummed old gospel songs while she worked, melodies he recognized from his own childhood when his mother would sing in the kitchen before everything went dark. How she always left a single jasmine flower in a small crystal vase by his bedside, replacing it every time she came, so that his bedroom always smelled of that delicate, haunting fragrance. How her hands trembled slightly whenever he entered a room she was cleaning, a subtle shake that made him wonder if she was afraid of him or affected by him in some other way. And how she never quite met his eyes, always looking down or away, as if direct eye contact might reveal something she needed to keep hidden. The elevator ride down from the penthouse felt endless, each floor ticking by with agonizing slowness. The mirrored walls reflected his image back at him from multiple angles. A man in his mid-30s, dark hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, dark eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. A jaw set in grim determination, wearing an expensive black suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. He looked like exactly what he was: dangerous, controlled, alone. His driver, a stocky man named Chen who'd been with him for 5 years, was stationed in the lobby, reading a paperback thriller and drinking coffee from a thermos. Chen straightened immediately when he saw Marcus approach, his hand instinctively moving toward the keys in his pocket. "Sir? I'm driving myself." Chen's eyebrows lifted a fraction, the only sign of surprise he'd allow himself. In 5 years, Marcus had never driven himself anywhere. That's what drivers were for. That's what the layers of insulation between himself and the world were for. But he handed over the keys to the black Audi without a word, without a question, because that's what good employees did. They didn't ask why. Marcus slid behind the wheel, adjusted the seat and mirrors with quick, efficient movements, and pulled out into the empty downtown streets. His knuckles were white against the leather steering wheel, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. "This is insane," a voice in his head whispered, the rational part of him that had kept him alive and successful for so long. "You don't answer personal calls. You don't rush across the city at midnight for your housekeeper. You don't let people see you care about anything, because caring is weakness and weakness is death. You don't do this." But he was already halfway to her address, punching it into the GPS even though he'd memorized it months ago from her employment file. He didn't even know why he'd bothered to memorize it. What possible use could he have for knowing where his housekeeper lived? Now he knew. The streets were mostly empty. Just a few late-night stragglers. Some homeless people huddled in doorways, the occasional taxi cruising for fares. Traffic lights turned from red to green to red again, and he ran two of them, his mind racing faster than the car. What was he doing? What was he walking into? What did she need? And why, of all the people in this city, had she reached out to him? Bella Martinez sat on the floor of her studio apartment with her back against the couch, her phone clutched in one hand like a lifeline and an empty wine glass dangling from the other, forgotten and useless. The bottle, her second of the night, lay sideways on the carpet beside her, a small dark stain spreading slowly where the last drops had spilled out. She'd watch it spread, mesmerized by the way the red wine soaked into the beige fibers, creating a pattern that looked almost like blood. She was going to throw up or cry or both. Maybe scream. Maybe all three at once. "What did I do?" she whispered to the ceiling, her voice thick and slurred, the words barely intelligible even to her own ears. What did I do? She'd sent the text 17 minutes ago. She knew it was exactly 17 minutes because she'd been staring at the screen ever since, watching the little delivered confirmation mock her, waiting for the three dots that would mean he was typing a response, that he'd seen it, that he was going to say something, anything. Nothing. Of course nothing. Why would Marcus Stone, the Marcus Stone, the man who owned half the city's underground operations and commanded the other half's loyalty through fear and respect, respond to a drunk text from the woman who scrubbed his toilets twice a week? Why would a man like that, a man who could have anyone, who probably had his pick of beautiful, sophisticated women who understood his world, give a damn about a desperate message from someone so far beneath him she might as well be invisible? She was invisible to him. She had to be. A fixture as unremarkable as the furniture in his penthouse, as forgettable as the jasmine flower she left by his bed every visit, hoping maybe one day he'd notice. Maybe one day he'd ask why she chose that particular bloom. Maybe one day he'd see her as something more than just the help. He never did. In 8 months, he'd never asked. Never commented. Probably never even registered that the flowers were there, or that they changed every time she came. Bella dropped her phone on the carpet with a dull thud and pressed the heels of her palms against her eyes, pushing hard enough to see stars behind her eyelids. The room spun gently, a lazy, nauseating tilt that matched the chaos churning in her chest. Wine and despair, she thought dimly. That's what her life had been reduced to. Wine and despair and bad decisions made at midnight. She'd had a terrible day. No, that was understating it. She'd had a terrible month. A terrible few months, really. But tonight, everything had come crashing down at once. Her mother's medical bills were piling up, stacks of paper with red stamps and final notices and threats of collections. Her brother Carlos was in trouble again, asking for money she didn't have to pay off debts to people who didn't accept excuses or payment plans. And tonight, when she'd dragged herself home after her shift at the diner, exhausted and aching, she'd found an eviction notice taped to her door. bright red letters screaming that she had 30 days to come up with 3 months of back rent or lose the only place she'd been able to call home in this expensive, unforgiving city. 30 days, 3 months' rent. Numbers that might as well have been millions for all the chance she had of scraping them together. So she'd opened the wine, and then the second bottle. And somewhere between the bottom of the first glass and the haze of the sixth, her mind had drifted, as it always did lately, to Marcus. To the safety she felt in his penthouse. To the way those mornings cleaning his space were the only time the world felt quiet and manageable, like she could breathe without the weight of everything crushing down on her. To the way she'd sometimes catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, an expression on his face she couldn't quite name, but that made her heart race. Something between curiosity and hunger, and a loneliness that mirrored her own. And in her wine-soaked, desperate state, she'd convinced herself that maybe, just maybe, he felt something too. That maybe those looks meant something. That maybe she wasn't as invisible as she thought. So she'd texted him, "I need you now." God, what had she been thinking? That he'd care? That a man like him would drop everything, would rush to her side like some knight in shining armor, would give a damn about the struggles of a woman who cleaned his floors and made his bed? She was black, broke, and barely keeping her head above water, drowning in debts and responsibilities that weren't even supposed to be hers. He was power incarnate, wrapped in expensive suits and dangerous secrets, moving through a world of money and violence and influence that she could barely comprehend. They existed in different universes, on different planes of reality. She might as well have texted God himself for all the good it would do. A knock shattered the silence of her apartment like a gunshot. Bella's head snapped up, her heart suddenly slamming against her ribs so hard it hurt. For a second, she thought she'd imagined it, that the wine had finally pushed her into full hallucination territory. Another knock. Firmer this time. Deliberate. 3 sharp raps that echoed in the small space. She scrambled to her feet, or tried to. The room tilted violently, and she grabbed the arm of the couch to steady herself, her legs shaky beneath her. The wine glass slipped from her fingers and rolled across the carpet, coming to rest against the baseboard. She stood there for a moment, swaying, her mind racing to catch up with reality. Someone was at her door, at almost midnight, after she'd sent that text. No, it couldn't be. It wasn't possible. She stumbled toward the door, each step requiring concentration and effort. Her apartment suddenly felt too small, too messy, too much a reflection of how far she'd fallen. Dishes in the sink, laundry in piles, the wine bottles lying on the floor like evidence of her weakness. She pressed her eye against the peephole, and the world stopped. Marcus Stone stood in the hallway of her 4th-floor walk-up, still wearing the black suit she'd seen him in earlier that day when she'd passed him in his penthouse, his jaw tight and shadowed with stubble, his dark eyes fixed on her door with an intensity that made it feel like he could see straight through the wood, straight through her defenses, straight into the broken, desperate mess she'd become. He'd come. He'd actually come. Bella's hand went to the deadbolt, then stopped. Her pulse roared in her ears like ocean waves. What was she doing? She couldn't let him see her like this. She was drunk, barely standing, her apartment a disaster zone. She was a mess, wearing old gray sweatpants that had been through the wash so many times they were more whole than fabric, and a faded Howard University t-shirt from her abbreviated college days, back when she'd still had dreams and possibilities. Her braids were piled in a lopsided bun on top of her head, half of them escaping and hanging around her face. Her mascara was probably smudged under her eyes from the crying she'd done earlier. She looked nothing like the composed, professional woman who showed up to clean his penthouse twice a week. He knocked again, and this time she heard his voice, muffled but unmistakable. Bella. Low, controlled, with an edge of something that might have been concern or might have been irritation. She couldn't tell. "I know you're there. Open the door." Her fingers fumbled with the lock, shaking so badly she could barely grip the deadbolt. It clicked. The chain rattled as she slid it free. And then she was pulling the door open, and there he was, real and solid and somehow even more overwhelming in her small, shabby hallway than he was in his penthouse. 6 feet of controlled danger and sharp edges standing in her doorway like he belonged there, like showing up at his housekeeper's apartment after midnight was something he did all the time. Their eyes met, and for a moment that stretched into eternity, neither of them spoke. Neither of them seemed to know what to say, what to do with this collision of their separate worlds. Bella saw something flicker across his face, quick as lightning. Surprise, maybe, at her appearance, at the state of her. Or concern. Genuine concern that looked foreign on features usually so carefully neutral. Or something else. Something deeper and more complicated. But then the mask slid back into place, that careful control he wore like armor, and his expression became unreadable again. Marcus saw everything in that instant. The wine bottles on the floor behind her, the smudged makeup under her eyes, the way she gripped the doorframe to stay upright, her knuckles pale against her brown skin. The vulnerability written across her face, raw and honest, and so different from the careful professionalism she always showed him. She looked young suddenly, younger than he knew she was, and broken in a way that made something protective and possessive stir in his chest. "You came," she whispered, and her voice carried disbelief and hope and fear all tangled together. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. "You texted." And in that instant, with the hallway's fluorescent light casting harsh shadows across his face, and her heart cracking open in her chest like an egg, everything they'd both been running from for 8 months stood between them in the doorway, impossible to ignore, impossible to deny, impossible to take back. Marcus stepped inside without waiting for permission, without waiting for an invitation, without any of the normal social niceties that governed interactions between people who barely knew each other. He just walked in like he had every right to be there, and maybe in this moment, he did. The apartment was smaller than his walk-in closet, and that wasn't an exaggeration. It was a true studio, maybe 400 square feet total. Exposed brick walls that might have been charming in a different context, but here just looked old and crumbling. A kitchenette along one wall that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s, with a 2-burner stove and a mini fridge and barely enough counter space for a cutting board. Furniture that was clean, clearly cared for, but worn and secondhand. A futon that doubled as her bed. A small table with 2 mismatched chairs. A bookshelf made of cinder blocks and planks, stuffed with paperbacks and textbooks. The air smelled like wine and jasmine, that same delicate scent that always lingered in his penthouse after she'd been there. He spotted the source, a small plug-in diffuser on the windowsill, next to a struggling jasmine plant in a chipped ceramic pot. Bella stumbled backward as he entered, her shoulder hitting the doorframe. She caught herself, steadied herself with visible effort, then pushed the door closed with more force than necessary. The click of the lock echoed in the tiny space, final and definitive, sealing them in together. "You shouldn't have come," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her. Marcus turned to face her fully, taking his time, his dark eyes sweeping over her face, cataloging details, looking for answers. Up close, she looked wrecked. Beautiful still, because that was just something inherent in her features, in the warmth of her brown skin and the fullness of her lips and the depth of her dark eyes. But wrecked. Her eyes were glassy and bloodshot, rimmed red like she'd been crying for a while before the wine kicked in and numbed her enough to stop. There was a vulnerability in her expression, in the way she held herself, that made something in his chest constrict painfully, like his heart was trying to beat around an obstacle it didn't know how to navigate. "Then why did you text me?" His voice came out harder than he intended, sharp-edged and demanding. She flinched like he'd raised his hand to her. "I don't know. I was drunk. I am drunk." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound that didn't reach her eyes, didn't contain any actual humor. You should go. Forget I said anything. Forget you were even here. Pretend this never happened. Bella. No. She held up a hand, swaying slightly, and he had to resist the urge to reach out and steady her. This was a mistake. A stupid, drunk mistake. You're my employer, Mr. Stone. I clean your house. That's all this is. That's all it's supposed to be. That's all it can ever be. Is that what you think? The question came out before he could stop it, before he could think about whether he should be asking it, whether he wanted to know the answer. Her eyes snapped to his, and for a moment the alcohol-induced haze cleared, burned away by something intense and honest. He saw everything in that look. Fear, yes. Longing that mirrored his own. Hope that she was trying desperately to kill before it killed her. What else could it be? She whispered. Marcus took a step closer. She didn't move away. The space between them felt electric, charged with 8 months of careful distance and stolen glances and words neither of them had dared to speak. The air practically hummed with tension. You left jasmine flowers by my bed, he said quietly, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. Every time you came, every single time, for 8 months. Why? Bella blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question, by the fact that he'd noticed, that he'd paid attention to something so small and seemingly insignificant. Her lips parted, then closed. She shook her head, braids swaying. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Why? The word burst out of her, loud and desperate, almost a shout in the small space. Why does it matter? Why are you here, Marcus? You don't do this. You don't come running when people call. You don't show up at midnight for people like me. You don't... Her voice broke completely, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling over and running down her cheeks, cutting tracks through her smudged makeup. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to her shoulders almost of their own accord, and the contact sent a shock through both of them, electric and undeniable. She was warm and trembling beneath his palms, her whole body shaking with suppressed emotion, and he realized with sudden, startling clarity that he'd never actually touched her before. Not once in 8 months. Not a handshake. Not a brush of fingers. Nothing. He'd kept that boundary sacred, a line he refused to cross because crossing it would mean admitting something he wasn't ready to face, something that terrified him more than any business rival or threat to his empire ever had. Bella. Her name sounded different in his mouth when it wasn't just a professional acknowledgement, when it carried weight and meaning. Look at me. She raised her eyes slowly, like it took every ounce of courage she possessed. Tears streaked down her brown cheeks, catching the dim light from the lamp in the corner, making them glisten like diamonds. She looked young and exhausted, and so achingly honest that it hurt to hold her gaze, but he forced himself to do it anyway. I'm here, he said, his thumbs moving in small, unconscious circles against her shoulders, trying to soothe, trying to comfort. Because you asked me to be. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. His grip tightened slightly. I don't answer personal calls. Ever. I have rules, Bella. Rules that have kept me alive, kept me in control, kept me from... He stopped, his jaw clenching so hard it hurt. From what? She pressed, her voice barely above a whisper but insistent. From this. The admission cost him something. He felt it leaving him, felt some piece of his carefully constructed armor cracking and falling away. He saw her register it, saw understanding dawn in her eyes like sunrise. You're scared, she said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, said with wonder, like the idea of him being afraid of anything was revolutionary. His hands dropped from her shoulders like she'd burned him. He took a step back, needing distance, needing to rebuild the walls he felt crumbling. I'm not scared of anything. Liar. She said it softly, gently, without malice or judgment, like she was stating something obvious, like she could see right through him. The wine had loosened her tongue, stripped away whatever filter she normally kept carefully in place around him. You're terrified. I see it every time you walk into a room I'm in. You look at me like I'm something dangerous, like I might explode if you get too close. You are. The words came out rough, unguarded, ripped from somewhere deep inside him before he could stop them. Bella's breath hitched audibly. How? How am I dangerous? I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I'm just your housekeeper. Marcus dragged a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his carefully maintained composure, that showed just how off balance she'd knocked him. When he spoke again, his voice was low, almost confessional, like he was admitting to crimes that could destroy him. Because you make me want things I can't afford to want. The silence that followed was deafening, absolute, thick enough to choke on. Bella stared at him, her lips parted, her eyes wide and disbelieving. The confession hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric, impossible to take back now that it existed in the world between them. What things? She finally asked, her voice trembling like leaves in a storm. He looked at her. Really looked at her. At this woman who'd moved through his penthouse like a quiet melody for 8 months, who'd left flowers she thought he never noticed, who'd sent him a text that broke every rule he lived by because she needed him and didn't know who else to call. Who was brave enough or desperate enough to crack open both their carefully constructed facades? Soft things, he said slowly, each word deliberate. Safe things. Normal things. Things that don't exist in my world. Things I convinced myself I didn't want, didn't need, couldn't have. What if I told you? Bella said, taking a shaky step toward him, closing the distance he'd created. That I don't need soft or safe? What if I told you I just need real, just honest, just you, without all the walls and rules and fear? Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides, every instinct screaming at him to leave, to walk out that door, to put the armor back on and pretend this conversation never happened, to go back to his empty penthouse and his bourbon and his carefully controlled world where nothing touched him and nothing hurt. But his feet stayed rooted to her worn carpet like they were nailed there. Why did you text me tonight? He asked instead, deflecting, needing to understand what had broken her carefully maintained professional distance. The truth, Bella. No bullshit. She looked down at her bare feet, her shoulders sagging under invisible weight. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear it, had to lean in closer. Because I was falling apart, and you were the only person I wanted to see. Because I've spent 8 months watching you from the edges of your life, existing in your space but never really being seen, and I'm so tired of being invisible. Because... Her voice broke completely, shattering like glass. Because I needed you. And I thought maybe, just maybe, if I could be brave enough to ask, you might need me too. The vulnerability in her words hit him like a physical blow, like a punch to the solar plexus that drove all the air from his lungs. He'd spent years, decades really, building walls around himself, controlling every variable in his life, making absolutely sure that no one could get close enough to hurt him the way his father had hurt his mother, the way he'd been hurt as a child watching it happen. And here was this woman, his housekeeper, someone who had every reason to keep her distance from a man like him, someone who should be afraid, offering him the one thing he'd convinced himself he didn't want, didn't deserve, couldn't handle: connection. Real, honest, terrifying connection. You're drunk, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice, no real belief in the words. I know. She lifted her eyes to his, and the honesty there nearly broke him. But I mean every word. I'll probably regret this in the morning. I'll probably be mortified and want to disappear. But right now, right this second, I don't care. I'm so tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel. So tired of hiding. And what do you feel? He needed to hear her say it, needed the words spoken aloud even though he knew it would make everything infinitely more complicated, even though he knew there would be no going back once she named it. Beatrice took a breath, steadying herself against the door frame. Safe. When I'm in your space. When I'm near you. Even when we don't speak. I feel safe. Even though you're dangerous. Even though you could destroy me with a word or a decision or a look. Even though everyone tells me I should be terrified of you, I feel safer with you than I've ever felt with anyone in my entire life. Something in Marcus's chest cracked open, a fissure in the foundation of everything he'd built. He'd constructed an empire on fear and respect, on making sure people kept their distance, on being untouchable and alone. And this woman, who should be the most afraid of him of anyone, who'd seen glimpses of his world and knew what he was capable of, felt safe in his presence. You shouldn't, he said roughly, almost desperately. Feel safe with me. I'm not a good man, Bella. I've done things. Terrible things. Things that would make you run if you really knew. I never said you were good. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the wine on her breath mixed with jasmine, close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. I said you made me feel safe. There's a difference. Good and safe aren't the same thing. This is a bad idea, Marcus said. But he didn't move away. Didn't step back. Didn't put the distance between them that his rational mind was screaming for. Probably, Bella agreed, swaying slightly. His hand shot out instinctively to steady her elbow, and the contact sent electricity up his arm, through his chest, straight to his heart. But I'm tired of good ideas. Good ideas kept me quiet for 8 months. Good ideas had me leaving flowers you never noticed. Hoping you'd see me. Hoping you'd ask. Hoping for something I told myself I could never have. I noticed. The admission came out quiet, almost reluctant, like he was confessing to a crime. Her eyes widened, genuine shock written across her features. You did? Every single one. He paused, his thumb unconsciously tracing circles on the inside of her elbow, the touch gentle and repetitive and oddly intimate. Bella, your name means beautiful in Spanish, and Jasmine means love and purity. I looked it up after the 3rd time you left one, researched it like I was investigating a business rival, tried to understand why you chose that specific flower. Bella's breath caught in her throat, a small, sharp sound. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they looked different. Less despair, less hopelessness. More disbelief. More something that looked dangerously close to joy. You looked it up? She repeated, like she couldn't quite believe it. Couldn't quite process that he'd paid that much attention. I told myself it was curiosity, that it didn't mean anything, that I was just being thorough, the way I am with everything. His voice dropped lower. I was lying to myself. Have been for 8 months. Why? She asked. And the single word carried the weight of 8 months of questions, of wondering, of hoping against hope. Why lie? Why keep the distance? Why pretend you don't? She stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Because men like me don't get happy endings. He said it like a fact, like something carved in stone and immutable. We get power and money and respect built on fear, but we don't get soft things. We don't get love. We don't get to care about people without it becoming a weapon someone uses against us, and we definitely don't get women like you. Women like me? Bella pulled back slightly, hurt flashing across her face like lightning. What does that mean? What kind of woman am I? Honest? Pure? Untouched by the darkness that defines my world? He gestured vaguely at her apartment. At her, at the small, carefully maintained space between them that was rapidly disappearing. You work for me, but you're not part of my world. You're separate from it. Clean. Like you exist in a different reality. One where people are decent and kind and not constantly calculating angles and looking for leverage. I'm not clean, she said, and now anger was bleeding into her voice, cutting through the wine haze and the vulnerability. I'm broke, Marcus. Completely broke. I got an eviction notice today. 30 days to come up with money I don't have or I'm on the street. My mother's sick, needs surgery we can't afford, and I can't even help her. My brother's in trouble with people who don't accept excuses or payment plans, dangerous people who might hurt him if he doesn't pay, and I don't have a cent to give him. I work 3 jobs and I'm still drowning, still failing at everything. So don't put me on some pedestal like I'm some innocent thing you'll corrupt. I'm just surviving, same as you, just with less blood on my hands. The raw honesty in her words stripped away another layer of his defenses, peeled back the assumptions he'd made about her. She wasn't some fragile thing that needed protecting from his world. She was fighting her own battles, carrying her own scars, drowning in her own darkness. They were more alike than he'd let himself see. The eviction notice, he said, his mind already working, already calculating solutions the way it always did when presented with a problem. How much do you need? No. She stepped back, shaking her head violently. No, that's not why I texted you. I'm not asking you for money. I'm not looking for a rescue or a handout or a solution to my problems. That's not what this is. Then what are you asking for? Bella looked at him, really looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the same thing he felt churning in his own chest. A desperate, terrifying want for something neither of them knew how to name, something that existed beyond transactions and jobs and the carefully defined roles they played in each other's lives. I don't know, she whispered, and the confession sounded like it cost her everything. I just knew I needed you here, that's all. I needed you to show up, to be real, to be more than just the man I work for. I needed to know if what I feel, if what I see in your eyes sometimes is real, or if I've been imagining it for 8 months. Marcus stood in her tiny apartment. This woman he'd spent 8 months trying not to see, trying not to acknowledge, trying not to want, staring at him with tears in her eyes and truth on her lips, and he felt the last of his control slipping away like sand through his fingers. He should leave. Everything in his carefully constructed world demanded that he walk out that door right now, go back to his penthouse and his bourbon and his carefully controlled existence, where he didn't feel anything and nothing could touch him. Where he was safe behind walls of money and power and violence. Instead, he asked, "Do you have coffee?" Bella blinked, thrown completely off guard by the question, her emotional whiplash visible. What? Coffee. Do you have any? He moved past her toward the small kitchenette, needing something to do with his hands, needing to feel useful in a way that didn't involve money or power or the threat of violence. You're drunk. You need to sober up. We need to talk. Really talk. And I need you coherent for it. You're staying? The disbelief in her voice was palpable, heavy, like she couldn't quite process what was happening. He looked back at her over his shoulder, this woman who'd broken all his rules with 3 words and a text message sent in desperation at midnight. Yeah, Bella, I'm staying. And as he watched hope bloom across her tear-stained face like flowers opening to sunlight, Marcus Stone realized he'd just made the most dangerous decision of his life. Not dangerous in the way his business deals were dangerous, not threatening to his empire or his money or his power. Dangerous to something far more fragile and precious. His heart, which he'd thought had died years ago along with his mother, but was apparently still capable of beating, still capable of feeling, still capable of breaking. The coffee maker sputtered and hissed, filling the small apartment with the smell of cheap grounds and steam, a domestic sound so at odds with who Marcus was and what his life normally looked like that it felt surreal. He watched the dark liquid drip into the pot with an intensity usually reserved for business negotiations, his shoulders tight beneath his suit jacket, his entire body rigid with tension. He'd removed his cufflinks, slipped them into his pocket, and rolled his sleeves to his elbows, a concession to the cramped heat of her apartment, or maybe to the strange intimacy of the moment, or maybe just because he needed to do something physical, something normal, something that made him feel less like he was standing on the edge of a cliff about to jump. Bella sat on the couch behind him, her knees pulled to her chest in a defensive posture, arms wrapped around them, watching him move through her kitchen like he belonged there, like this was something they did all the time. It was surreal. Marcus Stone, the man whose name made grown men nervous, whose reputation preceded him into every room, whose very presence could change the temperature of a conversation, searching through her mismatched cabinets for mugs like this was normal. Like powerful men showed up at their housekeepers' apartments after midnight all the time and made coffee in shabby kitchenettes. Top shelf on the left, she said quietly when he opened the wrong cabinet, finding plates instead. He found two mugs, neither of them matching. One said Howard University in faded gold letters, a relic from her college days. The other had a chipped handle and a cartoon cat giving a thumbs up, something she'd probably picked up at a thrift store. He poured coffee into both, black, and carried them carefully to where she sat, moving with a grace that seemed incongruous with his size and presence. "Cream? Sugar?" he asked, holding out one of the mugs. "Black is fine." She accepted it, wrapping both hands around the ceramic even though it was almost too hot to hold. The burn felt grounding, real, proof that this wasn't some wine-soaked hallucination, that he was really here, really doing this. Marcus settled into the armchair across from her, and the furniture creaked ominously under his weight. It was meant for someone smaller, less solid, not built to hold a man of his size and presence. He looked comically out of place, his expensive suit and polished shoes at odds with her second-hand furniture, his designer watch catching the lamplight. The whole scene a study in contrasts that would have been funny if it wasn't so emotionally charged. They drank in silence for a long moment, the quiet punctuated only by the sounds of the city filtering in through the thin windows, a siren in the distance, voices from the apartment below, the rumble of traffic that never really stopped in this neighborhood. Bella felt the coffee cutting through the wine fog gradually, sharpening the edges of the world, making everything too vivid, too real. The embarrassment was creeping back in now, flowing in to fill the spaces the alcohol had numbed. What had she done? What had she said? How was she going to face him on Thursday when she showed up to clean his penthouse? "You went to Howard," Marcus said, nodding toward her mug, breaking the silence. She nodded, grateful for the neutral topic, something to talk about that wasn't feelings or needs or the electric tension between them. "Got a full scholarship, full ride for 2 years. Then my dad died and I had to drop out to help with bills, to take care of my mom and my brother. Family first, you know." She said it matter-of-factly, like it was ancient history instead of a wound that still ached every time she thought about it, every time she walked past the university and thought about what might have been. "What were you studying?" "English literature, I wanted to teach. High school? Maybe college, if I could get there." She laughed softly, a sound without humor. "Stupid dream." "It's not stupid." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "It is when you're 28 and cleaning houses for a living instead of standing in a classroom, when your degree is half finished and you can't afford to go back. When you're drowning in debt and your biggest accomplishment is keeping your head above water for another month." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. She took another sip of coffee, using it as a shield, as something to do with her hands and her mouth that wasn't talking. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the mug balanced carefully between his hands. "You're a good writer, aren't you? I've seen some of the notes you leave, the detailed cleaning logs, the way you phrase things." "I was." She paused, reconsidering. I don't know. I haven't written anything real in years. Just grocery lists and rent checks I can't cash and apology texts to people I owe money to. Why not? The question hung there, simple and impossible at the same time. Bella looked at him, really looked at this man who'd inserted himself into her crisis without permission, without invitation, who was asking questions no one else ever bothered to ask, who was looking at her like her answers actually mattered. Because hoping for things hurts too much when you've been disappointed as many times as I have. It's easier to just survive, to get through the day, to not want anything more than what you can reach with your own two hands. Wanting more, dreaming bigger, that's how you get your heart broken. Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. I know that feeling. Know it better than you might think. Do you? The challenge in her voice was gentle but real, not aggressive, just genuinely curious. You own half this city. You have more money than I'll see in 10 lifetimes. You have power, influence, people who jump when you speak. What do you know about making yourself smaller so life doesn't hurt as much? Instead of anger or defensiveness, something like recognition crossed his face. He set his mug down on the coffee table, placing it carefully on top of the eviction notice she'd left there, though he pointedly didn't comment on it, didn't acknowledge it directly even though she knew he'd seen it, knew he'd read every word. I know, he said slowly, choosing his words with care, what it's like to want something so badly it scares you, to see it right in front of you, and know that reaching for it could destroy everything you've built, everything you've worked for, everything you've convinced yourself you need to survive. Bella's heart stuttered, missing a beat, then racing to catch up. What do you want? He looked at her then, and the rawness in his expression, the vulnerability she'd never seen on his face before, stole her breath, made her forget how to inhale. That's a dangerous question. I'm feeling dangerous tonight, she said, echoing her earlier bravery, the liquid courage still flowing through her veins even as the coffee tried to dilute it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, barely there, gone almost before she registered it. I noticed. He paused, seemed to be weighing something, deciding how much to reveal, how much truth to offer. You want to know why I really came here? The real reason? Yes. The word came out as barely more than a breath. Because when I saw your text, when I read those 3 words, I was sitting in my office thinking about how empty it felt, how empty everything feels lately. He dragged a hand through his dark hair, disrupting its perfect style, leaving it disheveled and somehow more human. I have everything I ever fought for: money, power, respect, fear, control. I sit in that penthouse every night surrounded by luxury most people can't even imagine, and I feel absolutely nothing. Just emptiness. Just silence. Just alone. Until? She prompted softly, her voice gentle, encouraging, pulling the confession from him word by word. Until you. The confession landed between them like a stone in still water, creating ripples that spread out and touched everything. You started working for me 8 months ago, and suddenly, for the first time in longer than I can remember, I had a reason to come home. I'd find excuses to be there when you were working. I'd change my schedule around your days. I'd notice what you touched, what you moved, what you changed, what you left behind. Those damn flowers. Bella felt tears prickling again, but she blinked them back furiously, not wanting to cry anymore, not wanting to be weak anymore. I thought I was invisible to you. Just another employee. Just the help. I needed you to be invisible. His voice roughened, took on an edge of something that sounded like pain. Because acknowledging you, really seeing you, meant acknowledging that I wanted something I couldn't control, couldn't purchase, couldn't threaten or manipulate or force. I've built my entire life on control, Bella. Every decision is calculated. Every risk is measured. Every move is planned 3 steps ahead. And then you'd be there humming those gospel songs while you cleaned, and I'd feel something I haven't felt in 15 years. What? The question was barely audible. Peace. The word came out quiet, almost ashamed, like admitting to weakness. You made my space feel peaceful, like home instead of just a place I slept, and that terrified me more than any business rival or threat to my empire ever could. She set her mug down with shaking hands, the ceramic clicking against the table. Why terrified? Why is peace scary? Marcus stood abruptly, too restless to sit anymore, too agitated to stay still. He moved to her small window, looking out at the street below, at the view of fire escapes and broken streetlights, and the kind of neighborhood his money had long since lifted him out of, a world away from his penthouse views of the glittering city. My father was a violent man, he said to the window, to the night, to the ghosts that still haunted him. He built his empire on fear and blood and brutality, and he taught me from the time I could understand words that caring about anything, needing anyone, showing any kind of weakness, made you a target, made you vulnerable, made you dead. He stopped, his shoulders rigid beneath his suit jacket, every muscle in his back tense and coiled. Bella waited, knowing he needed to get this out, needed to say it. My mother, he continued, his voice going flat in that way that meant the emotion was too big to express, too painful to acknowledge. He killed her when I was 17, beat her to death in our kitchen one night because she tried to leave him, tried to take me and my sister and escape. She thought she could save us. She was wrong. Bella's hand flew to her mouth, horror and sympathy and understanding all washing over her at once. Marcus. I was there. His voice remained flat. Emotionless. Dead. I heard it happen. I was in the next room doing homework and I heard every sound, every cry, every blow, every moment. And I didn't stop it. I was too scared. Too frozen. Too much of a coward. You were a child, Bella said fiercely, standing up, needing to make him understand. A 17-year-old boy. That wasn't your fault. You couldn't have stopped him. I was old enough. He turned to face her, and she saw the guilt carved into every line of his face, etched so deep it had become part of his foundation, part of who he was. After she died, I swore I'd never be weak again, never let anyone close enough to hurt me or hurt someone I cared about. Never need anyone, or let anyone need me. I took over his business after I killed him, cleaned it up, made it profitable, made it legitimate on the surface at least. And I survived by not feeling anything, by building walls so high and so thick that nothing could get through. That's not surviving, Bella said gently, crossing to him, closing the distance he'd created. That's just existing. That's just being alive without actually living. Maybe, he admitted, his voice rough, but it kept me alive, it kept me safe, it kept me from becoming him. He crossed back to her, but didn't sit, standing over her instead, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. And then you showed up with your quiet kindness and your jasmine flowers and your gospel songs and your genuine smile, and suddenly just existing didn't feel like enough anymore. Suddenly I wanted more, wanted something I'd convinced myself didn't exist. Bella stood too, needing to meet him on equal ground, needing to close the distance between them, physical and emotional. They were inches apart now, close enough that she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, and the weight of terrible decisions. So what changed tonight? She asked, her voice steady despite the way her heart was racing. Why break your rule? Why come when I called? Because, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, intimate and raw. When I saw your text, all I could think was that you needed me. Not my money, not my power, not my connections or my ability to solve problems with violence or threats. Just me. No one's needed me like that. Needed just me as a person, since my mother. Everyone wants something from me now. My money, my protection, my influence, my fear. But you just needed me, and I couldn't not come. I physically couldn't make myself stay away. A tear slipped down Bella's cheek, hot and unexpected. I do need you. I don't know why. I don't understand it. I don't know what that means or where it goes or how it works. But I do. And it scares me too, she continued, the words tumbling out now. Because you could ruin me with so little effort. One word from you and I lose my job, lose my income, lose everything. One bad day and you could make my life hell. The power imbalance here is... She gestured helplessly between them. You're my employer, Marcus. You're dangerous and powerful, and so far above me socially, economically, every way that matters. Don't. The word came out sharp, almost a command. He reached for her without thinking. His hands framing her face, tilting it up so she had to look at him, had to see the intensity in his eyes. Don't do that. Don't make yourself small. You texted me because somewhere inside you knew I'd come, knew I wouldn't ignore it, knew you mattered to me. You knew I'd show up. That means you see something in me worth trusting, something beyond the reputation and the power and the fear. I do, she whispered, her voice trembling. But that doesn't change reality. That doesn't change the facts of who we are and what you could do to me if this goes wrong. Then maybe reality needs to change. His thumbs brushed away her tears with surprising gentleness, the gesture achingly tender from a man whose hands were known for violence, whose touch usually brought pain instead of comfort. I don't know what this is, Bella. I don't have a name for it. I don't know how to do this. Whatever we're doing, whatever this is becoming. But I know I'm tired of pretending I don't feel it. Tired of lying to myself. Tired of being alone when the person I want is right there, close enough to touch, if I could just be brave enough to reach out. Feel what? She asked, even though part of her knew the answer, needed to hear him say it, needed the words spoken aloud so she knew she wasn't imagining this, wasn't making it up in her wine-soaked desperation. He searched her face, and she saw him warring with himself, saw years of control and self-protection battling against one moment of honesty, one chance to be vulnerable, to be real. Finally, quietly, he said, like I've been waiting for you my whole life and didn't even know it. Like you're the answer to a question I never knew how to ask. The words hung in the air between them, too big and too true to take back, too honest to ignore. Bella felt her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through, felt the coffee and adrenaline sharpening everything into painful, beautiful clarity. I'm still drunk, she said, even though the fog had mostly cleared, even though she was more sober now than she'd been in hours. I don't want you to say things you'll regret when I'm completely sober, when the morning comes and reality sets back in. I'm not saying anything I don't mean. His hands were still on her face, warm and steady and grounding. But you're right. You need to be clear-headed for this conversation, for whatever happens next. This is too important to rush, too important to get wrong. What will happen next? The question carried weight, carried hope and fear in equal measure. Marcus let his hands drop slowly, reluctantly, stepping back to give her space even though it clearly cost him something to create that distance. The loss of his touch felt like cold water, like a door closing, like something precious slipping away. You drink more coffee. You sober up completely. And then we talk. Really talk about what we both want, about what this could be, about whether it's even possible given who we are and the worlds we come from. And if what we want is impossible, if the obstacles are too big, then at least we'll know. At least we'll have been honest with each other. He moved back to the chair, putting deliberate, careful distance between them. even though she could see in his eyes that he wanted to do the opposite, wanted to close the distance and keep it closed. But I'm not leaving, Bella, not tonight. Not until we figure this out. Not until we at least try to understand what this is. She sank back onto the couch, pulling the threadbare blanket around her shoulders like armor, like protection. Outside, a siren wailed past, the sound rising and falling, a reminder of the world beyond this small apartment, the reality that would still be there in the morning. Inside, two people sat in uncomfortable silence, circling around the truth they'd finally started to name, testing the edges of it, trying to understand its shape. "Tell me something else," Bella said after a moment, needing to fill the silence, needing to know more about this man who'd shown up when she called. "Something real, something you don't tell people. I want to know you, Marcus, not the boss, not the man everyone fears, not the reputation. You, the person underneath all of that." Marcus considered her request, his expression unreadable, weighing how much to reveal, how much truth to offer. Then, quietly, he said, "I've been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to want company, to want someone else's presence, until Thursday mornings." "Thursday mornings?" Bella repeated, confused. "When I come to the penthouse?" "I started scheduling my meetings later on those days so I could be there when you arrived." His voice was low, almost ashamed. Just to hear someone else in the space moving around, humming, existing. Just to not feel so goddamn alone for a few hours. Just to be near you even if we didn't speak. Bella felt something crack open in her chest, a fissure that let in light and pain in equal measure. Here was this powerful, dangerous man admitting he'd rearranged his life around her cleaning schedule just to feel less lonely, just to be near her. It was the saddest and most human thing she'd ever heard, and it made her want to cry and hold him and promise that he'd never have to be alone again. "I started coming early," she confessed, matching his vulnerability with her own. "I'd get there at 6:30 instead of 7, even though I wasn't getting paid for that extra time. Just to have more time in your space before you woke up, before the day started. It felt like the only place in the world I could breathe, the only place where everything wasn't crushing down on me." They looked at each other across the small room, really looked, seeing each other clearly maybe for the first time. Two people who'd been dancing around each other for 8 months, orbiting each other like planets, finally admitting the gravitational pull that had been there all along. "We're a mess," Marcus said, but there was something almost like warmth in his voice, something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Yeah," Bella agreed, pulling the blanket tighter. "We really are. I wouldn't have it any other way." And somehow, in that moment, with those words hanging in the air between them, it felt like the most honest thing either of them had said all night. The coffee ran out around 1:30 in the morning. Bella stood at the kitchenette, staring at the empty pot like it was a problem she could solve through sheer willpower, like if she looked at it hard enough, more coffee would materialize. Her head felt clearer now, the fog mostly lifted, but the exhaustion was creeping in to replace it, heavy and bone-deep, the kind of tiredness that came from crying and confessing and holding your heart outside your body for too long. "I can make more," she said, even though she wasn't sure she had enough grounds left, even though she wasn't sure her hands were steady enough to go through the motions again. "Don't." Marcus's voice came from behind her, closer than she expected. He'd moved so quietly she hadn't heard him approach, hadn't felt him cross the space. "You need to sleep. You're exhausted." "I'm fine," she lied, gripping the counter to prove him wrong. But the movement only made her sway more, made the exhaustion more obvious. A hand touched her elbow, steady and warm and grounding, and she let him guide her away from the stove, away from the pretense that she could keep going, that she didn't need to rest. "Come on," he said softly, his voice gentle in a way she'd never heard before. "Sit down before you fall down." Bella let him lead her back to the couch, and the moment she sank into the cushions, the exhaustion hit her like a physical wave, crashing over her and pulling her under. Her eyes burned. Her limbs felt like lead. She'd been running on adrenaline and wine for hours, and now both were abandoning her, leaving her wrung out and empty. "You should go home," she mumbled, even as her eyes drifted closed against her will. "It's late. You have important things in the morning. Meetings, business, empire stuff." "Nothing more important than this," he said, and the certainty in his voice made her eyes open again. She forced herself to look at him. He'd settled back into the armchair, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read through her exhaustion. Concern, maybe, or something softer. Something that looked like care. "You can't stay here all night," she said, but even she could hear how weak the protest was. "Why not?" "Because—" She searched for a reason that made sense, that would convince him, that would protect her from the vulnerability of having him see her asleep, defenseless, completely exposed. "Because it's weird. Because people will talk if they find out. Because you're you and I'm me, and this isn't how things work." "Bella." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his dark eyes serious. "No one's going to find out, and even if they did, I don't care. Let them talk. Let them think whatever they want. None of that matters. You should care. Your reputation—" "My reputation is built on fear and blood money and violence," he interrupted, his voice firm. "I think I can survive people knowing I spent the night making sure my housekeeper was okay. Besides, you texted me. You said you needed me now. What kind of man would I be if I just left? If I walked out after you were brave enough to ask for help?" The sincerity in his voice, the genuineness of his concern, undid something in her. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, suddenly feeling vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the wine or the late hour or the confessions they'd shared. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly, her voice small. "Do what?" "This. Whatever this is. I don't know how to be around you when it's not professional, when you're not my boss and I'm not your employee. I don't know what the rules are. I don't know how to act." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and she thought maybe she'd said the wrong thing, pushed too hard, asked for too much. Then he stood, shrugged off his suit jacket with deliberate slowness, and draped it carefully over the back of the chair. He crossed to the couch, and instead of sitting beside her, lowered himself to the floor in front of her, his back against the coffee table, putting them almost at eye level. The position was so unexpected, so at odds with everything she knew about him, that she just stared. "There are no rules," he said, looking up at her. "That's the point. We're figuring this out as we go, making it up, deciding together what this is and what it means and where it goes." Bella looked down at him, at this powerful man sitting on her worn carpet like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he did this all the time. "You're going to wrinkle your pants. Those probably cost more than my rent." "I'll survive," he said simply. A small laugh escaped her, surprising them both, a sound of pure incredulity. "I can't believe you're here, in my apartment, sitting on my floor. This is insane." "Yeah," he agreed, and that ghost of a smile appeared again, transforming his usually severe features into something softer, more human. "It is." "What are we doing, Marcus?" The question came out plaintive, almost desperate. The smile faded, but not in a bad way. He reached up, and after a moment's hesitation that felt like it contained years of self-protection and fear, he took her hand where it rested on her knee. His palm was warm, calloused in ways that spoke of violence she tried not to think about too hard, of a life lived in darkness and danger. But his touch was gentle, careful, like she was something precious that might break. "Honestly?" He looked at their joined hands. "I have no idea. I've orchestrated million-dollar deals. I've negotiated with men who'd kill me without blinking if they thought they could get away with it. I've built an empire from blood and fear and careful calculation. But this? You? I'm completely out of my depth. I'm drowning and I don't even know if I want to be saved. Good, she whispered, her thumb unconsciously stroking across his knuckles. Me too. They sat like that for a while, her on the couch, him on the floor, their hands linked in the space between them, forming a bridge between their two worlds. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt like breathing room, like the eye of a storm where they could both just exist without explanations or justifications or fear. Can I ask you something? Bella said eventually, breaking the quiet. Anything. Why Jasmine? You said you looked it up, that you researched the meaning, but why did it matter enough to look up in the first place? Out of all the things I could have left, out of all the details you could have noticed, why did the flowers matter? Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a tell she was learning to read. He looked down at their joined hands, watching his thumb move against her skin in slow, repetitive circles. Because the first time you left one, I came home, and the whole penthouse smelled like jasmine, and it reminded me of my mother's garden, from before everything went to hell. She used to grow jasmine on our balcony when I was little, before my father killed that too, killed everything beautiful and good in our lives. I hadn't thought about that garden in 15 years, hadn't let myself remember. And then, suddenly it was everywhere, filling my space, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel since I was a child. Bella's breath caught in her throat. I didn't know. I had no idea. I just thought. I know you couldn't have known, he interrupted gently, looking up at her. But when I smelled it, when that scent filled my home, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd forgotten it was possible. I felt safe. In my own home, for the first time since my mother died, I felt safe, and I needed to know why you chose that flower. If it meant something. If you meant something. And did I? The question was barely audible. From day one. The admission was quiet but certain, unshakable. I just didn't let myself acknowledge it until tonight. Until you forced my hand by being brave enough to reach out. Bella felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back fiercely. She'd cried enough for one night, exposed enough vulnerability. Instead, she squeezed his hand, held on tight like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. I chose Jasmine because of my grandmother, she said, offering her own truth in exchange for his. She raised me after my father died, took me and Carlos in when my mother was falling apart with grief. She had this tiny garden in Baltimore, really just a fire escape with some pots, but she grew jasmine there. Said it reminded her of home, of the South before she came north looking for work and opportunity. When she died, I kept a clipping from her plant, planted it in every apartment I've lived in since, trying to keep that connection alive. She gestured toward the window where her small jasmine plant sat in its chipped pot, struggling but surviving. That's why your penthouse has it. Not just because it's pretty or because it smells good, because it feels like home to me, like safety, like love, like everything good that existed before life got hard. So we've both been carrying our ghosts, Marcus said softly, both trying to hold on to something good that we lost. Yeah, she agreed. I guess we have. He shifted slightly, his shoulder pressing against her knee, the contact casual but deliberate, like he was testing boundaries, seeing what she'd allow, how close he could get before she pulled away. She didn't move away, didn't create distance. If anything, she leaned in slightly, accepting the contact, craving it even. Tell me about your eviction notice, he said after a moment of comfortable silence. Bella stiffened immediately. I told you, I'm not asking you for money. That's not why I called. That's not what this is about. I know, he said patiently, his thumb still tracing those slow circles on her hand. I'm not offering. Not yet. I'm just asking. You said you got it today? That's part of why you were drinking. I want to understand what you're dealing with. I want to know what's weighing on you. She sighed, exhaustion making her honest, stripping away her pride and her defenses. That and a dozen other things. My mom needs surgery she can't afford, and the hospital is threatening to cancel it if we don't come up with a down payment. My brother got in trouble with some guys he owes money to. Nothing compared to what you deal with, probably. Nothing major in your world, but enough to scare him. Enough that they've threatened to hurt him if he doesn't pay. I've been working 3 jobs and it's still not enough. I'm drowning, Marcus. And tonight it all just crashed down at once and I couldn't hold it together anymore. What are the other 2 jobs? He asked, and she heard genuine curiosity in his voice. Not judgment, not pity, just a desire to understand her life. I waitress at a diner on weekends, the graveyard shift because it pays a little more. And I do data entry for a law firm at night, remote work, transcribing depositions and legal documents. She laughed bitterly. I'm so tired I can barely see straight most days, running on coffee and determination, but it's still not enough to keep my head above water. Every month I'm a little further behind, drowning a little more. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and she couldn't tell if she'd said too much, revealed too much weakness, made herself too pathetic in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. What if I told you I wanted to help? I'd say no. The answer was immediate, automatic. Why? Because I need to know this. She gestured between them with her free hand. Whatever this is, it's not about money. I need to know you're not here because you feel sorry for me, or because you think you can fix my problems with your checkbook. I need to know this is real, that it's about me and you, not about what you can do for me, or what I need from you. That's not why I'm here. His voice was firm, brooking no argument. Then why are you here? The question came out more desperate than she intended, more raw. Really, Marcus, because I sent you a drunk text and you came running. You've stayed for hours. You're sitting on my floor holding my hand, and I don't understand why. I don't understand what I am to you. Marcus looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache, made her want to simultaneously look away and never stop looking. Because for the first time in 15 years, someone needed me for me, not for my money, not for my connections, not for my muscle or my ability to solve problems with violence or threats. Just me. Just the person underneath all the power and fear. And I realized, sitting in that penthouse alone, that I needed you too. Needed you more than I'd let myself admit. Needed me for what? Her voice was barely more than a whisper. To remind me I'm still human. His voice roughened, took on an edge of emotion he usually kept buried. To make me feel something other than empty. To give me a reason to come home that isn't just obligation or habit. To show me that there's more to life than power and money and control. Bella slid down from the couch to the floor beside him, the blanket pooling around her waist, needing to be on his level, needing to close what little distance remained between them. They sat shoulder to shoulder now, backs against the coffee table, knees drawn up, in the small hours of the morning when the world felt distant and unreal. This is crazy, she whispered, but there was no conviction in it. You know that, right? You're a literal crime boss, and I'm your housekeeper. This is the plot of a bad romance novel. This doesn't happen in real life. I've read worse plots, he said, and there was a hint of amusement in his voice that surprised her. She turned to look at him, eyebrows raised. You read romance novels? My sister does. Leaves them at my place sometimes when she visits. I may have skimmed a few out of boredom or curiosity. He paused. They all end happily. The guy gets the girl. Love conquers all obstacles. That sort of thing. Life isn't a romance novel, Bella said, but she wanted it to be. Wanted to believe in happy endings and love conquering all. No, he agreed, his voice going serious again. It's messier, more complicated. The power dynamics are real, not just pretend conflict to overcome. There are actual consequences. And there's no guarantee of a happy ending, no promise that this works out. Bella turned to look at him fully. So what are we doing right now? What is this? He met her gaze, held it. We're sitting on your floor at 2 in the morning, being honest with each other, being real. Beyond that? I don't know, but I know I don't want to leave. Not yet. Not until I absolutely have to. You have to eventually, she said quietly. Eventually, he agreed, but eventually isn't now. She rested her head against his shoulder, a gesture that felt both brave and terrifying, crossing another invisible line. He went still for a moment like he was afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. Then slowly, carefully, like he was handling something precious and fragile, he put his arm around her, drew her closer. The embrace was tentative, uncertain, both of them waiting for the other to pull away. Neither of them did. I'm still scared, Bella said into the silence, into the warmth of his embrace. Of what? Of this? Of me? Of wanting something I can't have. Of getting hurt. Of hoping and being disappointed again. She closed her eyes. Of hurting you. Of not being enough. You couldn't hurt me, he said, but his arm tightened around her slightly, belying the confidence in his words. Yes, I could, she said with certainty. And that's what makes this so dangerous. You're letting me close enough to do damage. Real damage. That's not something you do. That's not who you are. No, Marcus agreed quietly. It's not. But apparently for you, I'm willing to take that risk. They sat in silence after that, the weight of their confessions settling over them like snow, quiet and transformative. Outside, the city hummed its late-night symphony, sirens and traffic and the distant thump of music from somewhere below, life continuing on while they sat suspended in this moment. Inside, two people who'd spent months circling each other, dancing around the truth, finally stopped running. Stay, Bella said quietly, breaking the silence. Just for tonight. I don't want to be alone. I don't want you to leave yet. I'm not going anywhere, Marcus promised. I mean really stay, not just sitting up all night in that chair watching over me. The couch pulls out into a bed. It's not much. Not what you're used to, but... Bella! He turned to look at her, his face inches from hers, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Are you sure? Are you sure that's what you want? I'm not asking for anything except your company, she said firmly. I just don't want you to go yet. I just want you to stay, to be here, to let me know this is real and I didn't imagine it. He studied her face, searching for doubt or fear or ulterior motives, looking for any reason to say no. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. Okay, I'll stay. And as Bella helped him pull out the ancient sofa bed, as they found spare blankets and pillows in her tiny closet, as they navigated the strange intimacy of preparing to sleep in the same small space, she realized something fundamental had shifted between them tonight. They'd crossed a line, stepped over a boundary. There was no going back to professional distance now, no return to polite nods and careful boundaries. They'd seen each other, really seen each other, stripped of armor and pretense and the roles they played. And that kind of exposure changed everything. For better or worse, they were in this now, whatever this turned out to be. Morning came gray and hesitant through the apartment's single window, painting everything in shades of silver. Bella woke to the sound of water running in the bathroom and the disorienting realization that Marcus Stone had spent the night in her apartment, that last night had actually happened, that it wasn't some wine-soaked dream her desperate mind had conjured. She sat up slowly, her head pounding with dehydration, her mouth tasting like regret and cheap wine. The pull-out couch across the room was empty, sheets tangled where he'd slept, the pillow still bearing the indent of his head, proof that he'd been real, that he'd stayed. Reality crashed back in waves, each one bringing a new piece of last night with it. The text, the confession, his hands on her face, the words they'd spoken. I love you. Had she really said that? Had he? Oh God, she thought, pressing her palms against her eyes. What did I do? The bathroom door opened. Marcus emerged in his dress shirt and slacks from last night, the shirt wrinkled and untucked now, sleeves still rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms she tried not to notice. His hair was damp, pushed back from his face. And he looked rumpled and human, and somehow more devastating than he did in his usual perfectly tailored armor. You're awake, he said, and his voice was still rough with sleep, deeper than usual. I'm awake. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, suddenly hyper-aware that she was in old sweatpants and a t-shirt, her braids a disaster, no makeup to hide behind, completely exposed in the harsh morning light. I'm sorry. About last night. I shouldn't have... Don't. He crossed to the kitchenette, moving with surprising ease in her space considering this was only his second time here. Don't apologize. Not for being honest. I was drunk. You were, he agreed, already searching through her cabinets with the familiarity of someone who'd done this before. But you meant what you said. I know the difference. It wasn't a question, and the certainty in his voice both comforted and terrified her. He held up a small bag of coffee grounds she'd forgotten existed, maybe a quarter full. Good enough for a pot? I don't think I have any left, she started, but he was already measuring it out. This'll work. Bella watched him move through the motions of making coffee. This man who probably had people to do everything for him, who could buy a coffee shop on a whim if he wanted, carefully measuring out cheap grounds into her ancient machine like it mattered, like this simple domestic task was important. The normalcy of it felt surreal, felt impossible, felt like something from a different life, where they were different people. Did you sleep? She asked, needing to fill the silence, needing to know. Some? He glanced back at her, and something in his expression softened. You? I don't remember falling asleep. I remember us talking, and then... She trailed off, fragments of the night coming back to her, sitting on the floor together, his arm around her, feeling safe for the first time in so long. The coffee maker sputtered to life, and Marcus leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her with an intensity that made her want to hide under the blanket. We should talk about last night, he said. Should we? Or should we just pretend it didn't happen and go back to normal? Even as she said it, she knew it was impossible. There was no going back. Can you do that? He asked quietly. Pretend? Bella looked at him, really looked at him in the morning light. At this man who'd shown up when she called, who'd stayed when he could have left, who'd held her while she fell apart and put her back together with coffee and honesty and presence. No, I can't. Neither can I. The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Marcus turned back to the coffee, pouring 2 cups with careful precision. He brought her one, their fingers brushing as she accepted it, that same electric shock of contact that she was starting to recognize, to crave. He settled into the armchair, the same spot as last night, and the routine of it felt established, comfortable, like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Bella sipped the coffee, letting the warmth ground her, letting the caffeine sharpen her still fuzzy thoughts. What happens now? I don't know. He ran a hand through his damp hair and she realized it was still a tell, still a sign that she'd gotten past his defenses. I've been awake since 5 trying to figure that out. And I keep coming back to the same conclusion. He leaned forward. I don't want to walk away from this. From you. From whatever this could be. Her heart jumped. From what? From you. From this. From the possibility of something real. He set his mug down, his dark eyes serious and intent. But I also don't know how to do this without it being complicated, without the power dynamic being a problem, without putting you at risk just by being associated with me. Risk from what? Bella asked, though part of her knew the answer. Marcus's jaw tightened. Bella, you know what I do. You're not stupid. You've been in my home for 8 months. You've seen things, heard phone calls, noticed details. My world is dangerous. The people in it don't play by normal rules. And if someone wanted to get to me, wanted leverage, wanted to hurt me, he stopped, the implication clear. They'd come after the people I care about. She finished for him. Yes. Bella set her coffee down carefully, her hands steadier now than they'd been last night. So what you're saying is that caring about me puts me in danger? Yes. And you're trying to decide if it's worth the risk? No. His answer was immediate, forceful. I'm trying to figure out how to keep you safe while also not walking away from the first real thing I've felt in 15 years. The honesty of it, the raw vulnerability in his admission, made her chest ache. She stood, crossed to him, needing to close the distance, needing to make him understand. What if I told you I'm willing to take that risk? What if I told you I'd rather have you and the danger than safety without you? Then I'd say you don't fully understand what you're agreeing to. Maybe I don't. She sat on the arm of the chair, looking down at him. But I understand enough. I understand that last night, for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt seen and heard and like I mattered to someone. And I'm not willing to give that up just because it's complicated or dangerous. Marcus reached up, his hand finding hers where it rested on her knee, that same gesture of connection that was becoming natural between them. You matter, Bella. More than you know. More than I should probably admit. And that's exactly why I'm terrified of what happens next. Then be terrified with me, she said softly. Don't be terrified alone. Don't push me away because you're scared. Let me be scared with you. Let me choose this knowing the risks. They sat like that for a long moment, the morning light growing stronger, the city waking up outside, reality reasserting itself. Two people at a crossroads, trying to figure out if the path forward led somewhere real or just to more heartbreak. I have meetings today, Marcus said finally, though he made no move to leave, to let go of her hand. People will be looking for me. Questions will be asked about where I was last night. Okay, Bella said, though the thought of him leaving made her chest tight. But I'm coming back. He said it like a vow, like a promise carved in stone. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever you need me, I'm coming back. This isn't me walking away. Why? She needed to hear it again. Needed to understand what she was to him. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. Because you're my jasmine flower, Bella. You're the thing that makes my space feel like home instead of just an expensive box to sleep in. And I'm done pretending I don't need that. Done pretending I don't need you. Bella leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, brave and terrifying and exactly what the moment needed. When she pulled back, she saw something like wonder in his eyes, like he couldn't quite believe this was happening, that she was choosing him. Go, she said softly, even though every part of her wanted him to stay. Before your empire falls apart without you, before people start asking questions you don't want to answer. Too late for keeping this simple. I know. He stood, reluctantly releasing her hand, and gathered his jacket, his phone, all the pieces of his armor he'd shed the night before. At the door, he paused, turned back to look at her one more time. Bella. Yeah? Thank you, for texting, for letting me in, for being brave enough to need someone, for seeing me as more than just what I do or who I am out there. Thank you for showing up, for staying, for being real with me. And then he was gone, leaving behind the scent of jasmine and coffee and the echo of confessions that had changed everything. Bella stood in her apartment, in the space that suddenly felt too empty without him, and realized that last night had broken something open in both of them. Something that had been locked away and protected and carefully hidden. And now that it was open, now that they'd seen each other's truth, there was no putting it back, no pretending it didn't exist. For better or worse, they were in this now. And she couldn't wait to see what happened next. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here with me, for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, if something in here touched your heart or made you think about your own life differently, do me a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to be vulnerable, that it's okay to need someone, that reaching out isn't weakness. We're building something here, a space where real stories matter, where honesty is valued, where connection is possible. Your support makes that possible. Now, let me ask you, have you ever taken that leap? Have you ever sent that text, made that call, reached out when everything in you was screaming not to? Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help. Sometimes vulnerability is the only thing fear cannot control. And sometimes the person you're waiting for is waiting for you too, both of you too afraid to make the first move. Don't let fear win. Don't let another 8 months pass in silence. Reach out. Be brave. Send the text. You never know who's waiting to show up when you call.